to the cloud. And then we're going to, okay guys, we're going live on Facebook. Let me see if I can go ahead and work this out. Okay, so we want to do Chicago detours next. All right, everyone. So I am, let's see. All right, so I think I'm live on Facebook. I hope so. This is my first time doing it, but hello everyone, and welcome to, I see a bunch of you waving. Thank you, thank you. Welcome to the Hidden Architecture of Rogers Park tour from Chicago Detours. I'm gonna share my screen with you so you all can see my presentation here that I've prepared for you all. Okay. In the chat, or I'm going to do my best to pull out the chat window so I can see comments as they're coming in case there are any technical issues. But let me go ahead and present here. Wonderful. Okay. Well, thanks so much, everyone, for taking time out of your Sunday to share this hour of Rogers Park history. A little bit about our experience today. For the next 50 minutes, we're going to be talking about hidden neighborhood architecture in Rogers Park. It may not necessarily be hidden as an off the beaten path, but there are a lot of forgotten stories behind some neighborhood gems, particularly along this stretch of Sheridan Road that I'll be sharing with you, mostly because it was really convenient to do on Google Street View, and I'm going to be trying to incorporate that into the tour as well, not so that you're not just looking at a stagnant presentation, because I really want to try to make it a virtual tour and a walk, as it were. So this is parts of a series of virtual experiences that our tour company is providing in lieu of our in-person walking tour experiences of Chicago's downtown, historic bars, neighborhoods, and jazz and blues. On the weekends, we've been doing these neighborhood-focused talks, and then Monday through Friday, you can join us via Zoom for our happy hours for curious people every day at 6 o'clock p.m. Those are 30 minutes, so a nice little brief snippet. And this is part of our larger virtual tour program that we're doing. We've extended, obviously now that the shelter-in-place order has extended, we're going to be doing new programming with new tour topics, new neighborhood tours. So be on the lookout for those in the coming days. Yeah, and so these Chicago neighborhoods are more specifically about investigating the architecture and history of these spaces outside of Chicago's downtown. Let me go ahead and just talk a little bit about our company's history. Here it is here. And welcome back to those of you who have done these before. We're actually celebrating 10 years this year. This is our 10th anniversary year. It's not really what we expected to have to do and have to adapt to, but our executive director, Amanda, founded Chicago Detours in 2010 as a tour company for the curious. And we offer both private and public programs throughout the year by bus, by boat, and by foot. So our public tours are predominantly walking tours. Sometimes we'll do a special event as a bus tour, but our private experiences, we run the gamut. And I'm actually our private tour coordinator. So if you're curious about private tour experiences, or even arranging one of these talks for a team building exercise or a family outing, let me know. I'd be happy to give you more information. A little bit also about donations. We had someone at the beginning ask about donating. So these are free. But of course, as a small business, if you would like to give us a donation so that we can keep providing content like this for you all, it's greatly appreciated. Our community has been extremely generous, so thank you, thank you, thank you for those. You can donate 5 or more via Venmo, PayPal, Zelle. It's all on our website for how you can do that under the public tours page. So if you could please consider donating that would be wonderful. However, you know, if you're not in a space where you feel comfortable donating any money, that's totally fine. We get it. We will also love it if you just share these experiences with your community so we can kind of build out and welcome more people on these tours. A little bit about me now. My name is Ellen, and I think I mentioned this earlier, but I live in Rogers Park, which is why I'm presenting on it today. I'm kind of the person in the company with the personal tie to it. And I received my bachelor's degree in history from the University of Louisville, so go Cards, any Cards fans. But I received my master's degree in history at Loyola University Chicago in Rogers Park. So I've lived in Rogers Park for a few years now, but basically as long as I've been in Chicago, I've studied in this neighborhood, I've partied in this neighborhood, I've been out to eat in this neighborhood. So I feel very comfortable sharing with you about the history of it today. And a quick note just on the logistics. Whoops, I thought I had a slide in there about the logistics, but that being said, so at the end, I will leave 10 minutes for Q&A. Feel free to write questions during the tour to the group chat. I haven't quite figured out how to see the chat window while this is in full screen, so I will do my best to do both and answer along the way, but certainly the last 10 minutes of the tour will be devoted to Q&A. Just feel free to type in those questions as we go. On the note of questions, as I said, I've lived in Rogers Park for a while and I'm very familiar with it, but I don't know everything. That would be impossible. So I sense a lot of locals here on the tour, a lot of people who, you know, are very familiar with the city. So if I don't know the answer to the question and you know the answer, feel free to put it in the chat. And if I see it in time, I'll feel free to answer, but I'd love to open up that collaborative space so we can rely on our community members to, you know, answer any questions that I don't know the answer to because I don't know everything. But yeah, we'll see how this goes. All right, so without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So someone asked about where Rogers Park is geographically in the city of Chicago. And this is a map of Rogers Park. This is actually from the Chamber of Commerce website. It very clearly shows the boundaries. The northernmost part is Howard. And then below where Loyola University Chicago is in red, that's the southern boundary there right next to the neighborhood of Edgewater. So this is pretty much it here in Rogers Park. Today's talk will be focusing on 5 buildings in Rogers Park, particularly along the stretch of Sheridan Road, just west of Lake Michigan, and a little bit north of Loyola University Chicago's campus. So if you can see my cursor at all, basically from where this red dot is, going north up to Pratt. So I know there's a way to magnify that. I couldn't figure it out before the talk, so I do apologize. But so we're only exploring a very small part of Rogers Park today, but a lot of people walk or drive past the buildings on this route without actually taking the time to really examine the architecture and consider it in its historical context. So hence this term of hidden, right? So that's what we're going to be doing and exploring today. And before looking at these buildings, let's consider some of Rogers Park's early development to kind of set the tone for the tour today. So Rogers Park is incorporated into the city of Chicago in 1893. In its early history, Rogers Park was very rural, but it quickly became a desirable space for residential development, especially along the Sheridan Road corridor in the early 20th century because of its proximity to Lake Michigan, obviously, and the north side beaches, which made it a destination for recreation as well. So we see, of course, being in close proximity to the lake, very beautiful pieces of architecture being built, mansions, early 20th century mansions are being constructed to evoke that sense of luxury and opulence. We see apartment hotels for more short-term residential settling, but still kind of in that resort atmosphere, and as well as really beautiful commercial spaces as well to kind of mirror the affluent population who starts to move to Rogers Park. With the opening of the Howard L station in 1908, actually, we begin to see a big boom in Rogers Park's development because then this allows for people to start to commute downtown. More people can seriously live in these areas and move down to, or commute downtown. They can go to the great cultural institutions in the Loop. They can go downtown to eat, but then go back home where they are right next to the beaches of Lake Michigan. So pretty idyllic. And all of the buildings on this tour that I'm going to be showing you are really characteristic, particularly of this era in Rogers Park's historical timeline, that late 19th, early 20th century, either in the ornament that's very characteristic of that time period or just the type of building that it is. So on that note, let's go ahead and investigate our first building, but I'm going to go out to Google Street View to do it. Sometimes when I'm switching between the two, the presentation likes to drop. So I will do my best to make sure that our connection isn't lost. But let me see if I can, okay, so I have the chat going. So first things first, some of you may be familiar with this building, especially if you work on Loyola's campus. But this is it here. If anyone knows the building, but you don't work for Loyola, if you work for Loyola, don't say the name of this building, but I'd love to know if anyone in the group actually knows what this building is or what it's called. I'd love to know that first before I start talking about it. Does anyone know? Feel free to submit in the chat. If you don't, of course, it's no big deal, but I'd like to know if people know what this building is. No one yet? Totally fine. So this is Piper Hall on Loyola University's campus. I don't know if it was called anything. If you went to Loyola back in the day, it might have been called something else, but currently this is Piper Hall on Loyola University of Chicago's campus. And it's actually a really beautiful examples of one of those mansions that I mentioned that started to emerge in Rogers Park, on the North Shore in the late 19th, early 20th century. So on our tours, before I tell you more about the history, we like to ask questions to engage guests about what they're actually seeing in the architecture here. That's hard to do when you guys are on mute and there's just a chat box, right? But I'm gonna open it up to you all and just ask you all here. So knowing that the architecture we're gonna be looking at of this time period, between like the 1890s and 1930s, if you were to assign a decade within that time frame to this building, I'm curious to know from you, what decade do you think this building is from? Just by looking at it, knowing nothing about it, but just by looking at it. What decade would you assign it? And go ahead and put in the chat your best guess. Does anyone have a... Oh yeah, getting some responses, that's awesome. Okay, let's see. So we have 1920s, 1910s, 1900s, 1920s, question mark, 1910s, 1920s, 1890s. Yeah, so I'm seeing a little bit of everything. This is awesome. And that kind of was what I wanted to, that's kind of what I wanted, because what I think is really communicated about the facade of this building is its timelessness, right? You could almost pick any decade in that time range and think that it looks characteristic of that period. This building was actually built in 1909. So on the earlier end, so if you guessed 1900 through 1910, you were bang on the money there. But that's really just because of its, as I mentioned, its timelessness. It has a lot of these features that are very characteristic of American homes that we kind of think of now, with the wide sweeping porch. We have this hipped roof, a dormer window in the middle, which is actually kind of a precursor to the American bungalow that we see a little bit later in the 1920s and 1930s. But let me go back now to our slide presentation, and I'll actually tell you a little bit more about this building. Piper Hall here in 1909. The architect's name, and I've never said his name out loud, I've only ever read it, is William Carbis Zimmerman. But it was built in 1909 for a couple named Alfred and Cassie Wheeler. I don't know much about Alfred, to be honest, that made him so wealthy to be able to afford this beautiful home. But according to sources I used to research this building, Cassie was at least, his wife, a very well-known socialite and philanthropist. She was very involved, actually, also in designing the decorative elements in the interior of her home. She was very hands-on and worked with the architects to pick the interior architectural features. Hence, I think why it became known socially as Cassie's dream house, or her dream castle, sorry, is what it was called. So when the Wheelers entertained, actually many contemporaries of the time remarked on how tasteful and well appointed the interiors were, the decorative elements. And I'll show you some examples. You will get to see some of the interiors of the house. But one person that they did host was the famous Daniel Burnham. There's actually a quote that says when he came here that it was a masterpiece on the inside. So some real people thought this was an amazing home. Here's some historical photographs here of Piper Hall, then Cassie's dream castle, right? But the image on the right, that one's a little bit more recent. You can tell in the image there's an AC unit in the upper floors. So you can really, so that one's a little bit more recent than the one on the left there. That's actually where carriages would have come, or early cars would have come the driveway of the building. So that's more of the northern part facing the northern end of Rogers Park. But anyway, so the style of building is what is qualified as American Foursquare. It's not a building many people have heard of, like a classical revival or a Gothic or something like that. And that's because it's really classified more structurally as opposed to stylistically, like an art deco, right, or a European revival. You'll see in this image how there are large rooms on the main level. You can see kind of how spaced out it is. And they were perfect for entertaining, obviously, with these large windows that you could see overlooking the lake. And then that dormer window there in the middle would have been an attic space. So as I mentioned, very reminiscent of bungalows, which you will also find a dormer window that are kind of in miniature, a lot like this one. And actually I did a little introduction to the Rogers Park bungalow in another tour that we did that's called Architecture in Four Neighborhoods. It's on our YouTube page. So if you're curious to learn more about the bungalow in Rogers Park, watch to the end where I talk about it. And that's where it is. But anyway, so you can see the American Foursquare in a myriad of, I guess, decorative styles or something, or inspirations. You'll see them in craftsman, mission with more of that Spanish style, the arts and crafts style. And they were built largely in the late 19th, early 20th century. And they were very much bucking the tradition of these lavish, large Victorian homes. So they were a little bit more pared back in style, although early ones, of course, do feature some really lush elements. In Piper Hall, we see a lot of classical ornamentation. And we'll see inside the building as well. They're also called the Prairie Box. Why? Well, they shared many features with buildings done by Prairie School architects, the most famous of these, of course, being Frank Lloyd Wright. But unlike those homes, which are very free and open on the inside, these were a bit more divided. The Prairie School was all about bringing the natural landscape into the building itself. We can see some of the harmony with the landscape that's very indicative of the Prairie style, though, with all of the flat lines that are meant to replicate the landscape, right? So this is why it's called the Prairie School, hence the term, right? That Midwestern architectural landscape. There is a Frank Lloyd Wright home in Chicago, though. It's called the Emil Bach House. It is the only Frank Lloyd Wright home in Illinois that I know of that also doubles as a vacation rental. So if you want to stay in a Frank Lloyd Wright home overnight, you can do that. It's the Emil Bach home. I'll put a link at the end of the talk so you guys can have that. So if you want to take a look, it's worth it. And definitely during Open House Chicago, it's a very popular site. So worth a look. But the building was sold in 1916 to a businessman named Albert M. Johnson. And then it changed hands again in 1934 when it became a library for the adjacent Mundelein College. More on that in a second, kind of keep a pin on that thought. It actually became their library in 1934. So let's actually get inside it. And it's quite beautiful, as you can see. So the image on the left that you see here, that's, I don't have any photos of the interior from before 1934, when it became a part of Mundelein College. On the left here, that's the obviously the entryway where you would sign in for the library. And then you can see all the beautiful woodwork throughout, which believe those are still there. It's been a while since I've been inside Piper Hall. The last time was my graduate school days. But something that is still there and is original is the beautiful stained glass window above this grand staircase. And I have a close-up here in color of what that looks like. And that's original to the home, Tiffany stained glass window. To my knowledge, it was not actually done in the studio of Louis Comfort's Tiffany, but certainly this is reminiscent of that style. All the different colors and shades in the glass to create this really beautiful scene at the top of the staircase and bringing that natural world into the building. And then we have this light fixture, which is also the Tiffany style, that light fixture there. Here's another room with a direct then and now comparison. The one on the right is from when there was the reading room for Mundelein Library, and the one on the left is what it looks like now. I love that ceiling. There's some fleur-de-lis inlaid, if you, excuse me, look closely in the top there. But an original, of course, you can also see is the fireplace, and that is still maintained, an original to the building. So now Piper Hall is actually the home of the Gannon Center of Leadership and also the Women in Leadership Archives. And Women in Leadership Archives conduct tours of this building. So after quarantine, if you guys are interested in seeing it, definitely worth a visit. It's quite beautiful and the staff there is very welcoming. So let's go ahead and continue our journey to our next structure. So actually I'm going to go to Google Street View, and that actually kind of stepped a little bit on what my next building was gonna be, but we're gonna try and get a good image here of my personal favorite building on Loyola University Chicago's campus. Here it is. I'm sure you guys have seen it if you were in Rogers Park. Oh yeah, so who designed Piper Hall? Francis. That was the name of the architect is Zimmerman. So it was a home. But anyway, so this here is our next site, and it relates pretty well with Piper Hall. So we're going to do the same thing as before. Pretend you did not see the slide I just showed you. Hopefully you didn't see the year. But if you were to look at this building and assign a decade to it between the 1890s and 1930s, what decade would you assign this building just by looking at it? 20s, 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 30s, 20s. 20. Yeah, you guys got it. And you guys know that immediately by looking at it because of the style of architecture this is, right? This is Art Deco, a very stylized, very popular, and it's really penetrated popular culture, right? People know this style when they see it. It's very distinctive, but a lot of people don't immediately recognize or don't really link it beyond more than just its physical beauty, right? Just by looking at it. It's actually when it was in the 1920s and 1930s, Art Deco was also synonymous with being modern. And so that's something that really kind of comes to fore when we talk about the original occupant of this building. Loyola University now has it as their fine arts department. So this is where the plays are conducted on the campus and all that. There's a really cool auditorium in there. There are classrooms in here as well as common space, event space. A lot of weddings are done in the Palm Court, which are at the top of this skyscraper. But the original occupant has a really cool history that I think links with its style as well. And that is Mundelein College. I love the image of the class photo there on the right from 1936. And on the left, that's a photograph from a construction photograph from when it was being built in 1929. So the Mundelein College was founded by the Sisters of Charity of the Blessed Virgin Mary, or BVMs for short, in answer basically to a call of Cardinal George Mundelein. He said that there should be a Catholic college for women in Chicago, and the BVMs answered that call by building this skyscraper. The college opened its doors to its first students in 1930 as the world's first self-contained skyscraper college for women, meaning that all the facilities for this college were in this one skyscraper. Dorms, recreational facilities, classrooms, you name it. And it was actually built to accommodate 1,000 students. The very first weekend that they opened, they registered about 300 students from the Tribune article that I read. So certainly it was built to accommodate a large student body. So as I mentioned, back in the 1920s, Art Deco was synonymous for modernity and therefore very desirable. And so what better way to attract a student body, a female student body looking to obtain modern skills to compete in a rapidly changing you know, career landscape where they had to get new skills in secretarial work, in broadcasting. All of these things you could learn at Mundelein. So a better way than to have the appearance of the building itself communicate that sense of being in the present and being in the now. In fact, there's a Chicago Tribune article that was published at its groundbreaking, September 1930. Sister Maria Justitia Coffey, I think it's Maria, not Mariah, who's the first president of Mundelein, she said, "It is the aim of all of those in charge of the institution that the quality of the instruction shall be in keeping with the exterior of the college, modern, complete, and efficient." And all of those things were synonymous with Art Deco at that time. So now we consider it, of course, very beautiful, but back then it had an additional meaning as well. And I think it's pretty cool too, because the nuns were very involved and actually kind of fought with other leadership to choose this style versus something more traditional, like the Gothic, which is more affiliated with religious institutions. So I think it's pretty cool that they won. Let's take a look at the interior. These are historical photographs around 1930. They're pretty bang on. Anyone who's had a class in this building or has walked through it or seen a play in Rogers Park, it looks very similar. I love the light fixtures. They're so characteristically Art Deco. And then on the far right, that's the auditorium. I believe this is an image of the dedication ceremony in 1930. You can see the choir of the ladies there. But there's, I believe, George Mundelein, Cardinal George Mundelein, just hanging on his dais there. So he's pretty cool. But let's take a closer look at some of these decorative elements on the facade of this building. So it was hard to tell, obviously, from the Google Street View. Here's some zoom-ins of some of the features. On the far left, these are the angels that are on the facade of this building, highly symbolic. They're meant to represent archangels. Forgive me if I mispronounce their names, but Uriel and Josephil. Forgive me if I get those wrong, but they're meant to be symbolic for protecting the students of the building, but also symbolizing with the Book of Wisdom and the sort of light there to talk about how this is an institution of higher learning and knowledge. And I love all the iron detail, the intricate iron detail with the Art Deco motifs there. And then, of course, we see BVM inlaid in the entrance there, which is short for Blessed Virgin Mary, and that's the women religious who were involved in building this magnificent skyscraper. So what this really shows us, of course, is how buildings can really communicate to us in the present day what their larger place in history is. And just by looking at these details, these little things like the ironwork or these angels, you can start to kind of really read buildings just by looking at them on your day-to-day walks. So on that note of architectural details, let's go to my next. This is actually one that Tori mentioned at the beginning, right? Let's go to Google Street View, and we're gonna take a little journey up Sheridan Road here, and we're gonna look at our next building. Here it is. We're gonna do a little Google Street View, see if I can get a good image here. All right, here we go. Wait, that's Raising Cane's. Here we go. All right. So a lot of my locals may be like, Bruno's? What the heck? What's going on with Bruno's here? Now, Bruno's is kind of a bit of a legend for people who live in Rogers Park. Oh, it says hit close. The photo of the angel. Can people see everything that's going? There aren't any technical issues? Can everyone see the building? Okay, I see some thumbs up. Wonderful. Okay, so it's a bit of a legend, stable for 25 years, and it's unique in that it's a slashy. So it's an old tap room there on the right, but you can also go in there and grab your beer and go. And there are a few of these on the south side, notably Maria's, and Bridgeport is pretty famous for this, and they're coming back into fashion, but it's known for this gritty atmosphere, which is kind of at odds with the building it's actually in, the building itself. So let's take a closer look. It's called the Kirschbaum Building is the name of the building. It's hard to uncover the actual purpose. I looked through Tribune articles and I swear to you, I couldn't find what its original purpose was, But it wouldn't be hard to guess that this was at one point a shop, probably had some wide windows at the bottom with some offices there on the top to allow natural sunlight to penetrate through. It was completed in 1922. Now there's some kind of surprising features in the building. We're going to go in close. Let's see. And I'm going to show you one of them in particular. So up here, do you all see the zoom in? So this is a skyline, a city skyline, and using the chat, can you tell me, I know the tree is in the way, it's not ideal, but can you tell me what city, can you guess what city this might be just by looking at the skyline? Chicago, 1922. Yes, Ezra, you are right. It is Chicago. The buildings there we can see, we have the auditorium building, Civic Opera House. We have a few other landmarks here, but yeah, it's kind of weird that it's all on the facade of this kind of now dive bar. But the terracotta that was done, the terracotta decoration, the people that actually designed the terracotta decoration on this building were from a well-known terracotta company called the Northwestern Terracotta Company. They were a Chicago company that created terracotta decoration for the biggest names in architecture: Louis Sullivan, Frank Lloyd Wright. It's really incredible that we have this as kind of a remnant of that time from when terracotta architecture in Chicago was having its biggest boom in the early 20th century. Of course, we started building in terracotta so much after the Great Fire of Chicago in 1871, because the prevailing wisdom was that if you bake the material, it won't burst into flames quite as quickly. Everything will burn if it gets hot enough. But that's why you see terracotta so popular in Chicago, especially in the late 19th, early 20th century. And the opulence of this terracotta on the exterior really, I think, pinpoints how, oh yeah, Fort Dearborn, very good. Julia says Fort Dearborn. So Fort Dearborn is actually on the left of this. It's hard to see from this, but I'll go ahead and share back in the presentation. This here, so on the left of this image, you can really see Fort Dearborn there. And then on the far right, on the other side of the city skyline, that's meant to be smokestacks that really put the city on the map because of our heavy industry, right? But this really kind of pinpoints a specific era in time that really shows the opulence of Rogers Park at that time, that just these commercial spaces, these almost run-of-the-mill commercial spaces, would have been host to these really beautiful ornamentation on the exterior of these buildings. So let's take a look at another commercial space that I hope is near and dear to you all as it is to me. And if you've been here before, well, I hope you have. Let me see here. You'll probably know it right away. We're just going to go just right down the street here to, whoops, a little bit more down the street here. Here we go. Oops, too far. Here it is here. New 400. Has anyone been to a movie here? If you have, go ahead and put in the chat window. Yeah, good. I'm so glad. The new 400. So the new 400 actually is another example of these opulent commercial buildings. This one is a very different building. This one actually is a movie house, right? But when it first opened in 1912, it was a vaudeville theater, but it quickly adapted by 1913 to show silent movies. It was showing silent movies. So let's talk a little bit about the architecture before I geek out a little bit about the history of this building. I had a discussion with my colleague yesterday about the style of this building because it threw me a little bit. I couldn't find, I couldn't determine if it was classical revival or Spanish style because of the roof, but I think we can safely qualify this as classical revival, which speaks to the time it was constructed, right, in 1912. Classical revival was really, there was a huge neoclassical revival all across the country that started here in Chicago because of the World's Fair of 1893. Daniel Burnham, who was the chief architect of that fair, brought this style back into popularity again. So it's not it wouldn't be a stretch to say that this building is modeling these classical buildings that we see on the fairgrounds and using that style, just with a little bit of a Mediterranean roof, right, with the terracotta roof there. And also movie theaters were debuted at the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition, so it makes sense that we'd see one on our North Shore. But you also see the classical ornamentation of the genderless little cherubs in the top there and the laurels. If we get close, we can see some of the classical ornamentation, the colored terracotta. So incredibly ornate building. Now, let's go to the slides again, because I do want to show you something that you can't see from the outside of the building, but that is original to the building itself. Now, I apologize for the quality of the photo. I couldn't find a better one. This is from the website, but this is the tile flooring, the original tile floor that used to be outside in front of the ticket box. So you go to get a movie ticket. You don't see this now because it is inside the entry of the theater. So this is still there, but it's just beyond the entry. So next time you go, look down. You'll see a really beautiful original tile floor that you wouldn't expect to see, but it is original to the theater there. Like most theaters at this time, it was one screen, but it opened as the Regent. That's what it was called first. And really throughout its history, the New 400 has been a bastion of community. It, during World War I, took part in the 4 Minutemen program, where government spokesmen would come during intermission to tell patrons about the war effort. And by all accounts, this place was really classy. It was a really nice place. But it kind of fell a little bit into disrepair, especially by the 1960s and 70s. That's when it actually got its second wind. It was recoined the 400 Theater in the 1930s. But by the 1960s and 70s, they actually kind of got a second wind as a second run theater. So it wouldn't show the first run of films, big blockbuster films. It would actually start showing cult classics like Rocky Horror Picture Show at midnight, or, another coterie of other movies that you might catch. And so kind of, and it was, a nice cheap date night idea for the student body there. So it was a really great, and still very much a fixture of the Rogers Park community. I have a couple of artifacts from there. Here we have on the top left, that's an original ticket stub from 1925, admit 1. The middle there is a lobby card. Oh my gosh, 15 cents, 20 cents for a ticket. If only. But my favorite is the newspaper clipping on the far right that shows you a lineup of what you could have seen in '78. Deer Hunter, Rock and Roll High School, Eraserhead, and Freaks. That is wild. That's a real array. But if you're curious at all to learn more about the history of this building, which is very cool, my colleague, we went to grad school together, Matt Amick, wrote a really excellent blog post about it, which I'll put in the chat. But I want to move on because we only have a few more minutes. And I want to talk about this building here. And you all must think of affinity for dive bars, because this is where the Oasis is, right? If you've been to the Oasis, which is great karaoke and darts on Sunday nights. But here's Google Street View here. And before this building had the Oasis, before it was an apartment building where a lot of students live, it actually had another life as a luxurious apartment hotel. And if we look closer, there's actually a really fun feature on this building that shows you immediately its time and place. Do you guys see the RP at the very top there, short for Rogers Park? There it is. You can only see it from the Sheridan side. It's really cool. Now, a little bit about the history of the building. If we go back to the presentation itself, I actually have a matchbook of the early hotel. So according to the Rogers Park Westridge Historical Society, the Rogers Park Hotel was the first apartment hotel built in Rogers Park. It was from 1921. So apartment hotels, in contrast to luxurious apartments that were being built on the North Shore at this time, were more for they were more for short-term residents, but you could rent it long-term, but, you know, mostly for vacationers or, you know, people who wanted to take advantage of the lovely North Shore and still commute downtown if they were here in town for business or if they wanted to have a weekend away. So apartment hotels, though, very much in aesthetic, modeled these luxury apartments that were being built all over Chicago, really around World War I. So before World War I, apartment living was associated with the slums, especially very wealthy people didn't want to, in Chicago anyway, didn't want to be associated in living in an apartment. That was low class, right? But as we see, as people are getting more exposure to continental Europe, they're really starting to see this idea of the Parisian flat, of the Parisian apartment. And so the idea of these luxurious palatial apartments really starts to gain traction in the United States of America. And so these European style apartments, they were huge. They were spacious. You could have an entire family of 5 in there. But of course they had all of the amenities that you could want, like you would have in a regular mansion. There were staffs, there were great rooms where you could entertain. And so this really started to be an option for the upper classes in the late 19th, early 20th century. Middle class folks even started to go to these spaces because they wanted to seem like they were the most stylish in society. And then here in the image, you can see, this is circa 1922. I actually took this from a blog, but in appearance, it looks very similar to how it looks now, very much in that classical style. We are in the late 19th, early 20th century. So you really get that sense by looking at the building that it's very of its time. And here are some newspaper clippings from when it was open as an apartment hotel. I've actually never been inside this building in one of the residences. I'd love to know if there's anyone who has been. But grand ballrooms, these large apartment suites with these antique furniture. Actually, you could have an event in these spaces. So very much kind of being a part of the community as well for local nightlife and entertainment. There was a great dining room where you could go out and have a lovely meal. So these are really fixtures of that identity of Rogers Park as a kind of mini resort area in and around the city of Chicago. So I've gone a little bit over time. I know it's gone so quickly. It's hard to believe. But so on this tour, I've taken you just a little exploration of Rogers Park along Sheridan Road. We've seen mansions, we've seen skyscrapers, luxurious commercial architecture, and concluded at this historic apartment hotel. And so just like, you know, it's just like this neighborhood that really shows an array that is characteristic of this time period, this array of different buildings that we've seen kind of give us a snapshot into what it would have been like to be in Chicago, and specifically Rogers Park, in the late 19th, early 20th century. So I'm going to open up to you guys. I've talked a lot, so I want to open it up to you guys for questions now. So feel free. The chat is yours. Ask me anything. We'll go ahead and just read through these. And like I said at the beginning, if I don't know the answer to your question, I will be honest. Maybe there's someone else who knows it. It looks like Ezra. My grandparents went there. Yep, if this was the new 400, when you could buy a movie ticket and a drink for a total of 17 cents. My gosh, those were the days. That's pretty awesome. So Ronnie says, my roommate has been in there. My partner, he also, we had friends in Chicago who lived in that building. I never visited her. He says the inside, and I think this is where the Tapas restaurant is too, if you've been to Twisted Tapas. This is also where, so apparently there have been a lot of aesthetic changes on the interior of the building. So I don't know if there's even a fraction of what used to be there still in that building. I would love to see, but maybe if you go to that Tapas restaurant, you might be able to kind of get a sneak peek of the interior. Any questions in the chat? Any at all? I'll start posting some of these resources so you guys can explore some of these spaces that I mentioned. One of them is Emil Bachhaus. That's that Frank Lloyd Wright that I told you. Let's see, I'll go ahead and open this up to everyone. Oh, here's some questions. Okay, so let's see. When I visited my grandparents at Sheridan, it was only a tall building. All of them looked like Loyola Hall from the 50s and 60s. Yeah, there was a lot of buildup, obviously, on the stretch of Sheridan Road. You see a lot of brutalist buildings from the 1960s, some more modern architecture, kind of mixed in with the more decorative late 19th, early 20th century examples. Did Mundelein change to Loyola, or is it a separate college? Great question, Dory. Mundelein affiliated with Loyola University Chicago in 1991, so Loyola kind of absorbed it. So that also meant that the buildings then became affiliated with Loyola University Chicago's campus. Piper Hall, that I'm frozen on in my screen, that was the library at one point, but it was also a student hall at one point in Mundelein's history. But the buildings all kind of became part of Loyola. And notably, the Mundelein records for the college, those are now maintained at the Women in Leadership archives that are in Piper Hall. There are actually some really phenomenal digital collections that I'll share now. Do I have it? Yes. Of Mundelein College, where you can see yearbook photos. There's a huge digital collection of photographs where you can see women doing like activities, recreational activities, sports teams, anything. And there are great exhibits online. So you can see pretty much the extent of Mundelein's history on that website there. It's really interesting. And if this is an area of particular interest to you, like women's education, it's a great resource. So definitely worth a look. Someone says, have to go. When was Apartment Hotel built again? Lynn asks. So that was built in 1921. And according to the Rogers Park Westridge Historical Society, it was the first apartment hotel in Rogers Park. Other famous apartment hotels built around the same time is the Edgewater Beach Apartment Hotel. That's really beautiful. You can't miss it on Lakeshore Drive. It's a big pink building. See the upside down building in the class photo. I don't know if I can see that. Vince, you'll have to point out maybe in an email what you're seeing so I can see what you're seeing, because I don't see an upside down building unless someone else sees it. I see a crest in the middle that's meant to be, so the eagle, that's the crest, I believe, of the BVM house. But I don't know as much about the crest as a symbol of the school. Oh, the white spaces between images. Oh, you know what? You're so right. It does kind of look like an upside down skyscraper there in the middle. That's really cool. I don't know if that was on purpose, but that would have been a cool design choice. You mentioned broadcasting as being a major Mundelein in the 1930s. That surprised me. Any more you can say on that? Yeah, I'm not as big an authority on the broadcasting program at Mundelein. If you go in the digital collections, they had a very robust radio a radio broadcasting department and drama department. One of the big alums, actually, from the Mundelein drama department is a woman by the name of Mercedes McCambridge. If you know her, she was in All the President's Men, I think. It's All the King's Men, All the President's Men, but she won an Oscar. She won a supporting Oscar. And so she's a very well-regarded actress. She was a radio actress before that. And she experienced a lot of success in cinema, but she was kind of a standout of the department there. She also is famously the voice of the demon in The Exorcist. She had a bout with alcoholism later in her life that she was very transparent about, and she actually was an advocate for treatment of alcoholism in the United States. So she was quite an interesting woman, but she was very method. So she actually started drinking whiskey again to get the proper rasp in her voice to do that. But yeah, she was an alum of the Mundelein College Broadcasting Department. There you go. Oh, there, Barbara says, thank you, really enjoyed the tour from Pittsburgh, PA. Wonderful. Okay, guys, that's it. Thank you so much for sharing your time with me today. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm going to post a link to our website if you would like to donate. I'll do that now. I'll stop share so I can get this here. But if you would like to give any amount of money, you can please don't feel like you have to. If you don't want to give money, just share the word. We are very thankful for all of the people who have taken time to show us support. And hopefully you'll join us for some of our other tours. I hope I was a good representative, enough that you'd want to come back. So thank you guys, thank you. And have the rest of your Sunday. Have a good rest of your Sunday. Bye. Bye-bye.
We get off.
Oh,
Thank you
you.
so much.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
Bye,
you.
Bye,
everybody.
thanks.
Bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you very much.
Bye. Oh, she was in yesterday. Okie doke. Oh, where's leave? There it is. Oh, leave keeps there.
Thank you.
Leave.
Bye.